to Nell and Jeremy to Nell. Streaming to you recorded from Seattle, Washington. Here we go.
Good morning and welcome to the Plowline podcast. I've got a very special guest today, Eileen Day McKusick. I've been working to do this interview for a very long time, and I'm very excited to have this conversation and have you along for it. I'll read you a quick quote before we jump in. This is from the August 2020 issue. Biofield medicine is an elegant solution to what ails us. By treating the body as a vibrating symphony of waveforms, we change the way we consider not only ourselves, but all life forms. And so, without further ado, I want to introduce Eileen Day McKusick, the author of two books, Tuning the Biofield and The Electric Body, Electric Health. Eileen, thanks for joining us.
Hi, Jeremy. Yeah, thanks for having me.
So for people who are completely new to your work, can you give us a little bit of background on yourself and biofield tuning?
I started using tuning forks back in 1996 in a part-time massage therapy practice. And 30 years later, I'm still using them, still fascinated by them. My work has expanded beyond sound therapy with tuning forks into also sound therapy with our own human voices. So
Mm,
I'm a sonic explorer, I'm a map maker. I'm the founder of a sound therapy method called Biofield Tuning and also a vocal liberation program called Sing the Body Electric. As you noted, I've written two books. I've got a third one in the pipeline for this fall and I've created 2 albums and more of those on the way. Basically, just someone who's very interested in optimizing the human experience. How can we be physically, mentally, emotionally, spiritually free? I'm really driven by this idea of what it means to be free. And I've just found sound to be a very useful, effective, and efficient medium to do that. I was in the restaurant business for 20 years. I owned a very busy restaurant, and I'm extremely efficiency oriented. I'm always looking for the shortest route from point A to point B, and
mm.
sound has really been that vehicle for me.
What's the story behind the tuning forks? Like, what gave you that inspiration in the moment of providing massage therapy?
I started on spiritual scientific journey, if you will, when I was 18. And the reason why I set off on that path was I became bulimic when I was 17. And when I
Mm,
was 18, I tried to stop and I couldn't. And I experienced for the first time the sense of inner division that my conscious mind wanted one thing, but my subconscious mind and my body were acting out something completely different. And I was in the grips of addiction. And my mom sent me to our family doctor, this new doctor that I'd never seen before because she didn't know what to do. My mom grew up in World War II. They didn't have enough food. And she said, this problem you have is a disease of your time. I don't have any context for it. So,
mm.
she tried to get me help in the only way she saw. And I sat down with this guy and started talking to him. We ended up into an argument over whether reality was subjective or objective. He insisted that it was objective, and I said, "There's no way to perceive an objective reality because we view it through a subjective lens. Like,
Yeah.
it doesn't matter if reality is objective, there's no way we can perceive it objectively." And basically, he threw up his hands and he was like, "I can't help you." 'Cause I'm so stubborn and argumentative. So then I was like on my own to get it sorted. And I started reading all kinds of self-help books. They were really populating there in the late 80s and early 90s.
Yeah.
And and after 3 years of pretty much nonstop reading, I've always been a very avid reader. I figured out a few things. I figured out that one, I had been programmed by my culture. Like my mother said, it was a disease of my time. And just by
Yes.
being in that environment, I became subjected to it and informed by it. The other thing that I realized was that it was my hand and my mouth. And if I wasn't in control of myself, who was or what was? That there was nobody coming to save me, that I had to sort it out myself. So I was able to get over the purging part, but remained a sugar addict for decades to follow and really struggled with how to get over that addiction. And for those of you who are researchers, which I imagine clearly you are, Jeremy, and I'm
Yeah.
sure people watching your podcast know that it's like a trail of crumbs, and one book, one topic leads to the next, leads to the next. And I'd come across the quantum theory and the idea that everything was vibration, which seemed very logical to me. And then that led me to vibrational medicine, use of color, sound, and music and healing. There wasn't an awful lot out there back then, but I read everything I could get my hands on. And then I had just happened to get a catalog in the mail that had a set of tuning forks for healing in it.
Huh.
I was like, oh, sound healing. Let me check these out. And at the time, I was doing massage therapy part time, and I just started experimenting with my clients and making observations, and was really surprised by them. Like they didn't behave the way I thought they would. They revealed things I didn't expect to be revealed. They were surprising and intriguing, and that's enough to keep me going.
Yeah.
And honestly, has kept me going for 30 years. And I have the kind of mind that gets bored really easily. If something isn't like, then I'm just on to the next thing.
Yep.
But that they've never stopped intriguing me, and even now, I'm still learning and discovering, what bouncing sound from a single tone generator off the body and the atmosphere around the body can reveal. It's very complex, it's very nuanced, it goes far beyond, when you hear tuning forks. I think that regardless of whether you're a Christian and you think that they are of the devil, or
Yeah.
whether you're a hard scientist and you think they're of the hippies, they're just so, so, so much more than that. And I've had the great joy really of this journey of discovery and all the things that they've shown to me and all of the insights they've given me about what it means to be human, the human body, the human mind, the human spirit. It's really illuminated a whole territory that I never would have seen or understood or been informed by if I hadn't had them land in my lap the way they did.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, I've been playing with your tuning forks for probably 5 or 6 years. At the time, I was working with a massage therapist, for, an injury that I sustained at work. And she was very interested in these ideas. I gave her your book. I actually bought a set of tuning forks and shared them with her. And we experimented with, with moving through the biofield, with them. You can hear the resonance change. That's what really surprised me. It was like a guitar falling out of tune, or if you were to mess with the string after you plucked it. It was a really interesting experience. That was as far as I had gone with biofield tuning. She never got certified, and so it was really just an experiment of what's going on here. Is something, but I hadn't actually done a healing session. Do you think that this work was it accidental, or do you think this was inevitable that you were going to move into this?
Both. It was definitely accidental. Honestly, I had no desire to pursue it as anything other than a hobby. I did it
Mm,
as a hobby from 96 to 2006, maybe 1 or 2 people a week, if that. But then in 2006, I discovered the atmosphere around the body and the information that was there. And for the next 4 years, I mapped the biofield and I discovered that it had a very specific anatomy and physiology, and that it was the same from person to person. And when I started working out in the field, I started getting really dramatic therapeutic outcomes. And I realized that I
mm,
was onto something. Whenever we're not right and we go to a provider, we want to experience a state change. And
yeah,
more often than not, we don't, or it's subtle. Certainly in some things it can be dramatic. But my experience of trying to get help and going to providers hadn't cracked the nut of my difficulties. And, it was very elegant, it was very non invasive, it was very efficient, all things that I really appreciate. Didn't Still was resistant to the idea of going out on the world stage talking about tuning forks and auras.
yeah. Yeah.
I'm a very practical, grounded person, and there's something about that combination that just seems like almost unbearably woo-woo. It was the last
Yes.
thing that I wanted to put myself in the position of fielding the slings and arrows that would come from that perception. But in 2006, I received what I call my prime directive, which was a very clear download from my guidance system that said you need to go to school, get degrees, learn and teach about sound, advance the understanding of the science of the human energy field, the biofield, teach this to people, basically cover the earth with this approach.
Love
And
it.
I was like, absolutely not. Like, I'm sorry, but
It's
no, just no.
Yep. Yeah.
And I think a big part of that resistance was that, as much as I'm a curious person and I love to learn and I love to share, I didn't want to have to become like a somebody, right? I was happy to share the message, but it meant that I was going to have to become a messenger. I was going to have to become, a public personality. And I really didn't want that. I like my quiet life, and my clothes covered with animal hair and just like not having to worry about being a public persona. But after some contemplation, I realized that I was actually well suited to the job
Mm.
because I am so practical and I am so grounded. And that element was really necessary in bringing something that seemed so the opposite of that. So I relented. I went to college, I got degrees, I did all the things, I checked all the boxes. And now I'm back in school again
Yep.
and working on my PhD in integral health with a focus on biofield science and specifically how sound and music impacts the biofield and the mechanism of that.
As a researcher myself, this is a field that it's on the cusp, it's on the edge, and it relies on a transdisciplinary approach, which is very counter to our research into science. They follow very strict paths and compartmentalization in those paths. And so there is a real challenge personally here to remain on the edge, but I think that this research is so important and understanding our bodies beyond the chemistry of them or the physical particles involved in them, but the electrical aspect and the magnetism of our body is really important. Can you describe a little bit about your understanding of the biofield and where where that introduction first came for you and your thoughts on it?
Well, I started working on a master's thesis called Exploring the Effects of Audible Sound on the Human Body and its Biofield. I didn't have that title yet, but that's what it became back in 2010. I was in a master's in education program here in Vermont at that time. And I began by searching things like PubMed and Medline for human energy field and aura, because that's the only words that I had for it.
Yeah.
And I wasn't finding anything, and I was like, "What am I doing trying to write an academic treatise on an esoteric topic?" I was like, "This is ridiculous, I'm getting nowhere." But then I read the book, The Energy Healing Experiments by gosh, I can't think of his name in this moment, and in that book, I was introduced to the term biofield, and
Mm.
then when I started searching that, it bore fruit, and there wasn't a ton, but there was enough that I could frame what I was talking about. So, the official definition of the biofield was coined in 1992 by a panel of NIH scientists, including Beverly Rubik, who's done a tremendous amount of work of research in the biofield, really sort of the godmother of a lot of the science of this. And the definition of the biofield is that it is the energy, the field that surrounds and interpenetrates the human body that's comprised of electromagnetic energies, known electromagnetic energies, and then these putative subtle energies, which may or may not exist and aren't defined by science. And there's the rub right there in
Mm.
the acceptance is these putative energies, which may or may not exist. And that goes solidly into the realm of woo, of pseudoscience, or even
Yeah.
of spirituality, and we have a clear division between spirit and science in our culture. And And so I would say, I kind of boiled it down. I like to boil everything down to its like simplest, most useful way of looking at it. That the biofilm is essentially your body's electrical system.
Yeah.
It's the electricity that beats your heart, that makes your brain waves fluctuate, that is really running through all of your tissues. Every cell membrane has a particular optimized voltage gradient across it. Your fascia, your collagen, your bones are all piezoelectric, and there is electric current running through your body. And current science wants to say that that's a consequence of chemical activity, but that's just not true. It's a
Right.
force unto itself. That we all learned in grade school that anything that has electric current running through it has a magnetic field around it. That's your biofield. That's your aura. That's your human energy field. It's your magnetic field. It's so
Yes.
straightforward. I just can't even believe that we've all had the wool pulled over our eyes like we have for decades. We're like, what's the energy in energy medicine? That's taboo. That's nonsensical. That's hippy dippy. And there's just so much like
Right.
around this. And it's like, guys, this is so freaking basic. Electric
It
current
is.
magnetic field. Like, what's the problem here? Um, and magnetic fields guide and inform electric currents. And magnetic fields are, for the most part, primary, inductive.
Mm.
And so, biofield tuning is a process of adjusting the magnetic field to change the way electricity is flowing through the body and helping to bring it to more order or more coherence. So, it's all actually very straightforward, very in line with science we already understand. Science is definitely getting more hip to electricity in the body. There's been
Yes.
a lot more coming out about that, but they go pretty quiet about the magnetic fields. And so
Yeah.
that's where my interest really is. I just wrote a big paper on magnetism for my last class at school. And, we don't really understand magnetism, and there's a lot here to unpack. So that's kind of a current area of study is doing a deeper dive into understanding and explaining magnetism and how that relates to our body, mind, and our health.
The biofield isn't in question,
Mhm.
right? We know it's there. It's measurable.
Yeah,
It extends about
kg,
6. Yeah.
EEG, right?
And, it can be measured about 6 feet out from your so if you extend your arms, it's about the fingertips. And the amazing thing is that we live in a world in which electromagnetic technology, we've mastered it in many respects. Take a cell phone tower, for instance, so there is an electromagnetic signal coming off of those towers, which is transmitting massive amounts of data. There's information inside the signal and it's downloaded to a device or uploaded from a device. And that data is then converted into photos, images, words, sound. So, so the idea that there's this biofield and it's just a consequence of chemical reaction, it's nothing to really think about, doesn't really make sense. It doesn't really resonate, if you will, right? Not only is there a biofield and we know it, but there must be information in there because it's a signal that's transmitting information.
Yeah, absolutely. And we see it all over the place. Information held in standing waves, held in magnetic fields. Listen, it's just been intentionally obfuscated as a marketplace strategy for Rockefeller medicine. It
Yes.
was known and understood that the body had an electrical system, late 1800s, early 1900s. You could buy devices for your electric health from the Sears and Roebuck catalog.
Right.
This is very much a marketplace strategy to eliminate the competition and drive people into a chemical mechanical perspective of drugs and surgery as treatment. That's the
Yes.
bottom line. This idea that like science doesn't know, no, it does. Science knows about all of this. Our educational system, our marketing, our culture at large has been deeply programmed to reject this, to be skeptical of it, and to believe in the chemical mechanical model. That's
Yeah.
why we are in the position we're in.
You have a great quote on this again from the September issue, August 2020. Medicine's focus on particles rather than waves does not lead to health, but rather to more disease and more separation from nature, creation, and each other. And that is such a powerful alignment. This idea that health is not just about taking pills and changing your diet, but it is about being in alignment with the natural world that surrounds this human creation we've created. I mean, our human world is nothing but a grain of sand, less than that compared to the natural systems that surround it. So I think Yeah, I think we are way too focused on materialism, power, and money and influence
Mhm.
in order to really understand what's going on.
Yeah, it's just divide and conquer. It's all
Yeah.
part of the divide and conquer strategy of dividing us from our own biofield by like denying it exists, and it's through there's a quote that I really love. I think it's Goethe that nature has no kernel or shell. She is everything at once. And
Mm,
it's through that vibrational perspective, that electromagnetic connectivity, that we experience our connection to ourselves, to God, to nature, to each other. And that this has been very intentionally severed.
yes. Yeah, because if you can sever it, you can control it,
Exactly.
right? What made you trust your original observations and keep investigating when you started working with the tuning forks?
Curiosity.
Mm,
I would say that I'm very much driven by my curiosity. And every time I've had the opportunity to go down a path that was interesting versus a path that was safe, I've always gone down the interesting path.
yeah.
And so it's just one question led to another, to another, to another, to another, to another. It just kept going. I'm like, well, this, then that. And, just very much my own curious mind seeking understanding and seeking insight. And then also, it's a very normal human sentiment to want to help others.
Yeah.
And then to feel good when you subsequently do help others, right? It's a motivating force. And I just kept seeing over and over and over again how my explorations were reducing suffering in the people who came to me. So I would say it was a combination of those two things. And then that turned into sort of a public demand. More people kept showing up. I didn't really go out looking for people. They found me when I created my first book. Never did any kind of advertising or marketing for any of the stuff that I was putting out there. But there was definitely a hunger to understand what I was kind of out there figuring out. And I am good at taking topics and making them really simple and easy to
Mm,
understand. And I think a lot of people are kind of stuck in the complexity of academia or maybe the oversimplification that's based on faith and isn't necessarily informed by science. And I'm very fortunate to have both sides of my brain, pretty on in what I'm doing. And there's also a love of words. And
mm,
as a writer, I definitely thrive on how can I elucidate this not only in a way that's understandable, but that's also practical and immediately usable? So there's a practicality in it, and that gives me pleasure and joy to figure out that process.
yeah. Yeah. I feel that. Would you describe trauma as something that's partially a problem of unresolved resonance?
I would describe trauma, yeah, it is an unresolved resonance, but it's also a contraction. All of life
Mm,
is a pulse, right? Everything in life is contraction, expansion, contraction, expansion. You think about just, we were speaking earlier about man being the measure of all things and how everything is in us as it can relate to the world around us. To your heartbeat, your breathing, the way fluids move through your body, the way that we grow, we expand and we contract. And
yeah.
so when we have a traumatic input, there tends to be a contraction, and it's the failure to be able to expand back out through that contraction. It's that contraction coming
Huh.
in and taking root in a pattern of tension in the body, a pattern of tension in the mind. And then there's a subsequent distortion in the signal as a consequence of that arrested expansion. So we find trauma in the biofield as noise in the signal because of the chaos of that and the body's inability to be resilient in healing itself and going back out into its expanded state. And then there's a pretty much almost always a pattern of tension in the body that relates to that. So what I've really observed over, I've treated many, many thousands of people at this point, um, and there's a lot of debate around what causes disease, right? Some people are
Mm,
like, "Oh, it's toxins or it's parasites or it's, we beasties or any it's genetics," right? Well, what I've really observed is that it's simply patterns of tension. And
interesting.
that when the body has gone into a contractive response, and you think about someone who grew up with an alcoholic, rageaholic father, and all of the sonic inputs that were injurious, that carried
Yeah.
negative impact, that we're in a constant state of contraction against those inputs. And the body gets hardwired into that contraction and it shows up later as disease. And this is something that is becoming more and more understood about how childhood trauma creates chronic disease, creates disease later in life. When the body has patterns of tension present in it, the garbage trucks can't get into that area. The
Yeah.
nutrition can't get into that area. The oxygen can't get into that area. And you start to experience pathology as a consequence of lack of flow.
Yeah.
So, what my work really fundamentally does is it locates very precisely patterns of tension in the body that were there as a trauma response that has yet to recover, and then supports the body in releasing that into doing what it's designed to do, which is that pushback. And that's the nature of resiliency. And I don't talk about immunity in my work because I don't necessarily believe in bad bugs. Also, because you can't reduce wellness into like a tiny system in the body. It relates to the whole strength and clarity of your own signal and the strength of that bounce back. To take hits. We're all going to take
Yeah.
stress. We're all under pressure. But how vital and alive and engaged is your ability to push back on that and bring yourself back to homeostasis, to release, shake off whatever hit you got, and then fully recover from that so that you're not harboring those patterns of tension that are going to create a decline in the physiology.
So the body can get stuck in these oscillatory, or lack of patterns, but the biofield tuning can help to restore rhythm and flexibility within that. When you're bringing the fork through the biofield, can you can hear, probably feel too through the fork. Can you? Is it simply a matter of identifying? Oh, there's something here. Let's work through it, or can you physically move it?
Mhm. Well, yes. So it's both. So I would say the tuning forks are simultaneously diagnostic in that they help to reveal they're sort of like an invisible ink decoder that uses sort of a sonic braille to reveal where these patterns of distortion are held very specifically in the field. So by combing a fork through the field, we both feel it in our fingertips when we encounter that distortion. You can feel how
Yeah.
the vibration changes, and then you can hear the distortion. Many, many, many hours of being exposed to this, I've really decoded that there's a language of vibration that the overtones and undertones of the tuning forks reveal that shows the emotional information that's present. So I'm able to identify any emotion in that sound or any pathology because every pathology has a particular noise to it because
Oh,
the
that's interesting.
yeah, because things aren't moving properly, right? If you all of a sudden your car starts making a waka 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 sound, you don't know what it is, but your mechanic gets in it. He knows what that sound
Yeah,
is.
he can isolate.
Your CV boot is loose. You're like, oh, thank God
Right.
you know, right? Because he's experienced that noise that arises from things not moving properly. He has experience with that, right?
Yeah.
So it's the same thing in your body that if something isn't moving properly, it gives off waves that are distorted and they are very replicable, just like
Mhm.
everybody's left CV boot sounds the same way when it goes south. Your liver sounds a particular way when you have fatty liver, or your joints sound a particular way when you have arthritis, right? So I've
Yes.
really decoded this language, and I'm sorry, I'm just hearing a lot of static. I just turned off my mic, but that didn't do it. As a sound therapist, I'm super aware when there's a noise in the signal. So that's really what it is. It's noise in the signal that is identifiable to me as a provider, but also to your organizing intelligence because you are designed to be in harmony. You are designed to be in order. And just like if you haven't seen a mirror in a while and you get to one and your hair is a mess and you have a seed in your teeth, your first instinct when seeing a reflection of yourself is to put yourself back in order. So that's what happens in the biofield. I get into an area of distortion. I reflect that back to the body. The body goes, wow, I'm really out of order over there. So the tuning fork then becomes like a metronome. It's providing a steady rhythm. It's got this steady tone. And the body uses that signal reflection to bring itself back into order. It's beautiful. It's so elegant. It's like we're
It
self
creates a feedback loop.
a feedback loop. And
Yeah.
our voice is the same way. Like when people go to sing and they don't like their voice, that's because their voice is the same signal feedback loop that is showing them where they have tension. So we can use our own voice for the same purpose of locating where we have tension and helping it to release. It works on the exact same principle. And so, what is often in this pocket of tension, both at the level of the field and the body, is energy. Right?
Yes.
You think about all the energy that goes into like holding your shoulders tight. Well, that's energy that's not circulating. It's stuck in this pocket of sort of chaotic tension. It's usually some kind of response to some input that is stressful. And so there is energy held both in the field and in the body in that noise in the signal.
Yeah.
So when we resolve the noise in the signal, if you think about being in a place where an alarm is going off and you're like, I can't think, I can't do anything, I'm in tension. And then all of a sudden that alarm stops. Then what do? You go,
Yeah. You relax.
you
Yeah.
relax. So that's what we're doing. We're, on a very subtle level, this noise in your own signal and the tension that's in it is stopping you from being free to be free. And
Yeah.
so when the noise settles down, that energy that was held, electromagnetic energy, is then free to be restored back into circulation.
Hmm. Okay, that makes sense. In tuning the human biofield, you describe spatial correlations between areas of the field and memories, emotions, and life experiences. When you went through that mapping process, how does that, I mean, just say arbitrarily, you start at the head and you move down. Like, how did that mapping process kind of come about? Did you physically draw something out? How did you diagram that?
Well, I discovered the information in the field completely by accident. And it happened very randomly one day because I had only for 10 years, I'd only sort of worked right over the body because why would I do anything other than that? And
Right.
then one day in 2006, accidentally discovered something going on. I discovered a loud spot, a tonal change, a very dramatic one, about 2.5 feet away from someone. I had walked out of the room, and when I came back in, for whatever weird reason, I activated the tuning fork at the door and started just
Huh.
walking towards her with the fork activated and then went through this loud spot and then out of it. And I was like, the heck was that? No. And so I went back and I started exploring it and actually did an adjustment because I've been finding loud spots around the body and kind of dragging them to the middle. That was sort of how my process had evolved. I'm like, well, it's gonna be loud anywhere. It should be loud over the chakra or the midline of the body. And so I'd find a loud spot over the shoulder and I'd drag it to the middle. But here was a loud spot hanging out in space, And so
Yeah.
I dragged that to the middle. The therapeutic outcome was wildly dramatic. And so that led me to become curious about, well, what else is going on here? And so I started as far away as I could in the room that I was in with the next people who came in and started observing all kinds of stuff under like walls and eddies and blank spots and loud spots and distortion. And I was like, well, this is so fascinating. But, the way that the map really came to me was kind of odd. I read a book, I think this was when I was working on my master's thesis, and this gave me a language to describe it. This fellow in this book, I wish I could remember his name, talked about how the way his intuition delivered messages to him was through what he called his mail slot, MAIL slot, like the kind that are indoors, and they go
Yeah.
boop, and the mail comes in. And, it was in the back of his head, so, information would come in like little notes through that. Well, that was exactly my experience. So I'd be combing the fork through the field and I'd hit a distortion, and all of a sudden my mail slot would open and a little note would drop in, and it would say something like, "Sadness, age 14." And so I would
Huh.
say to the person, "What did anything sad happen to you when you were 14?" And of course they would have a story, and they tell me it was like this big sad story. And so that is the way that I mapped the field. It all came to me. I'd hit a distortion and exactly what it was would come in through my mail slot. and it would always correlate. And so through that experience, I started to recognize, oh, that's a sad sound, that's an angry sound, that's a frustrated sound, that's block moving forward, that's worrying about the future, that's saying yes when you mean no. Like all of these different states of mind that we inhabit as humans started to populate. And then the age piece, what I started to discover was that information memories that were generated recently were close to the body.
Sure.
Information from actually, I have a Taurus right here with me. Um,
I've got the
so
same one.
yeah, so the biofield is a Taurus, right?
Yeah.
So the body is in the middle. So in this model, the biofield is your mind, it's your sense
Yeah.
of I, and the body is actually inside the mind rather than the other way around. And so the magnetic field is where the memories are stored in standing waves. So it's like our own personal cloud storage system in the atmosphere around our body, or our own personal Akashic record. That the outer boundary, which I came to identify as a double layer plasma membrane, held the memories related to gestation. Just inside that was birth. And then, so starting at the outer edge of the field is like dropping on a needle on an album, really, and sort of reading the vibrational record of someone's life. And just like an album, it's got highs and lows and crescendos and quieter spots. Your field is the exact same thing. And so this whole pattern began to emerge. So if I'm working on somebody who's 40, I'm going to find information that was generated when they were 20 about halfway through their field, right? So it's about 6 feet. It
Yeah.
extends front and back and sides, and then so on, right? So this the biofield becomes your memory bank, and this ability, and I just learned how to read the biofield like a book. I would blow
Mm.
people's minds. I just go through them like, this happened when you were this age. This is the personality of your mother. Or this is a frame of mind you regular inhabit. But then on a physical level, like you have inflammation here. This isn't functioning there. You have a minor subluxation in T12. It's triggered in this way. Like I'm able to like see, hear, and perceive all of this information just by bouncing sound and listening to the ping back.
Hmm.
So, but the mechanism that it came through was curious, and I remember being so perplexed by it. I was like, "How do I know this?" Or "Where is this information coming from?"
Yes.
It was always accurate, right? And I'm
Yeah.
too practical to talk about things like gods, I just can't go there. And I never had a sense of any kind of, like, gods. It was just the anonymous mail slot drop, like,
Yeah.
but, super, super accurate. And so that's how the whole field got mapped. It was a combination of my own observation, pattern recognition, and these mysterious messages that were always accurate.
The one of the reasons for trying to develop a hollow fractal um, application to systems theory and complexity theory in my dissertation work is trying to explain feedback loops like that. And the best, the best thing that I can kind of come up with is, we're our experience in this universe is nested boundary levels, right? And we often think of these boundaries as being, we think of boundaries in general as being impermeable, but in reality, there are bridges across these boundaries. And, well, they're just overlaid, is what they are,
Right.
and they're holographic, which means that they're projecting each other, and they're fractal, which means that they're propagating patterns. And so, as you described earlier, that feedback loop that's happening between the individual and the biofield as you're moving through it, there's got to be a hollow fractal feedback loop happening behind, beyond you, right? And so that information is moving here and it's moving somewhere out here. And I don't know that that requires a lot of woo woo to explain it. I think it's simply, we may not be able to explain its source, but we can certainly explain its mechanism.
And I think anytime we look across domains, disciplines, models of things, you see the same kinds of patterns repeating again and again. Like life is
Yes.
very fractal, is very holographic. And that was something that I really looked for in framing my model is like, well, how can I look to similar kinds of things in other domains and draw a parallel to that? Like, even in the shamanic concept of soul retrieval, there is this explanation that when we experience trauma, a bit of our soul breaks off. I would say your
Mm.
body and your soul, pretty much the same thing. It is
Yeah.
your life body, right? It is your individuated sense of I that is created by light. So what a shaman will do is they will go into an expanded state. They will go back in time. They will retrieve that soul fragment and then they will bring it back to the body and blow or place it into the body. Well,
Mhm.
that is exactly what I'm doing in my tuning forks. I'm
Right.
going back in time. I'm locating this soul fragment, if you will, this bit of light, this bit of energy that is stuck, and then liberating it, and then literally bringing it back to the midline of the body, the center of the biofield, so that it goes back into circulation in the whole system.
Yeah, by bringing it into the center, you're putting it back into the flow, right? So it's
Exactly.
no longer stuck.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes sense. You had this description, let's see. This is from Electric Body, Electric Health. No, wrong one.
Mhm.
Let's see. Where is that? Well, shoot. It's the idea that, that we're swimming we're swimming in this uh um in this reality of energy. But that energy can be also understood as plasma. And these, these ideas of what you're moving are little stuck pieces, fragments of this plasma and moving. And I believe I read that plasma theory was kind of an interjection point for you. I think your son was studying this and introduced you. We've talked a lot about energy and biofield. Can you bring in a little bit of the plasma lens and what your understanding has evolved in that area?
Mhm. For many years, especially when I started doing the field combing, I had some big questions. I was like, when you're combing through the field, as your massage therapist discovered, as anyone who picks up a tuning fork and kind of quietly, slowly, and mindfully does this practice, as you move the fork along through the field, you encounter an experience of bumping up against something and feeling like it has mass and like
Yeah.
it's stopping you. And I remember being like, "What the heck is this?" Because it sure feels
Mass.
like stuff to me that has mass, and yet it's invisible.
Mhm.
And what law of physics is dictating the fact that I can move this mysterious stuff with my tuning fork? Like, I just didn't get it at all.
Yeah.
And so it wasn't until a few things kinda came together all at once, and one was that my son came to the dinner table in December of 2009 and he said, "Did you know that there is a fourth state of matter called plasma?" Because I'd given
Mm.
him some science books for his 12th birthday. And a fourth state of matter called plasma. I was like, "No, solid, liquid, gas." Like, how did I miss an entire state of matter, right?
Right.
And so then I went and I started searching it and couldn't believe it. I just couldn't believe it. Like 99.99% of the universe they claim is plasma and none of us know what it is. Like, how has this
How do we
eluded me?
miss that?
How have that we escaped this understanding? And I explored the electric universe theory guys. Wal Thornhill, who was one of the architects of electric universe theory, became a friend and a mentor. And I sort of simultaneously discovered that the body has an electrical system. Well, nobody taught us about that either, right?
Right.
So here are these very important parts of this realm that we weren't taught about. And
Yeah.
we've been so programmed to think like our education is the end all be all and we learn everything that there is and everything that's important. And so, how could there be such a gross omission of this sort of thing? That, having the word plasma and then discovering bioplasma, the Russian research that was done on bioplasma,
Yes.
essentially, what plasma is it is the movement of electric current, whether that's in a diffuse plasma in like our atmosphere, like I walk out to the waterfall there, we talk about the ionized environment of the ocean or a waterfall in the woods. But what is that? It's a plasma. It's electric
Yes.
charge, electric current. It's a movement of electricity. Lightning is a plasma. So it can become very concentrated like a spark or a lightning bolt or it can just simply be diffuse in the air in different quantities. So we go to ionized environments to recharge. So this is common lexicon, and yet nobody quite gets what's going on
Yep.
because we haven't been told about plasma. We haven't been told about our electrical system and how our electrical system is fed on plasma, on charge, on light. Even when you breathe in, your
Mm,
blood becomes bright red because it's carrying charge. And it
right.
becomes dark red when it's depleted. That charge is what is getting dropped off for your cells to make use of light. That's why people can be breatharians because everything we need is in the air.
Yes.
And it because the air is, what's the word I just came across when you get gosh, why can't I think of it? A colloidal silver, right? Where silver
Yes.
is suspended in it. The air is colloidal. It essentially has everything, including this charge that we really run on. Even digestion is this electrical fermentation and this process of stripping the light, the sunlight, the charge out of the food and sending that to your body. So we really run on
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. And breath, emotion, attention, sound, they're all interacting within this field.
Mhm. Yep.
In your recent article, you describe sound as potentially fundamental to organization itself. This is the Harmonic Science Alliance article. What led you towards that conclusion, and can you kind of elaborate a little bit on that article?
Mhm. Back in 2006 or 2007, I was introduced to cymatics and the work of Hans Jenny and his sort of seminal cymatic videos that you can go look those up on YouTube. And it blew my mind. I was like, whoa, like the sound current really does underlie everything, that every
Yes.
single thing is shaped by this sound current. And because there's really no stuff, right? It appears, they say like the electron is like 99 or an atom is 99.99 empty space. No, it's 100% empty space. It is all waves. There are no particles. Particles are an artifact of human perception in the way that we slow down wave movements so things appear solid, but they aren't really. We're really living in a mind field of
Yes.
energy and information and no stuff. And that everything is shaped by the sound current, including our own bodies. And so I would say that there's a lot more to sound than we're told. And that particular article, I go deep into all of these additional properties of sound that we don't acknowledge. We don't
Yeah, you
acknowledge
really
sound
do.
as an organizing force. We don't acknowledge that when sound moves through a plasma, which is our atmosphere is a weak plasma, any waves moving through a plasma generate electromagnetic charge. Propagates spherically, it contains complex geometric information. It absolutely informs structure. There's so much more to sound than, "Oh, it's a mechanical wave of molecules bumping up against each other, moving like this." And so, in the past, when I've asserted that sound is an electromagnetic wave, people get really upset with me because they're so adhered to the standard model and the way that it's described, and the absence of understanding that our atmosphere is a plasma. People always somehow want to cite how sound doesn't travel through a vacuum. I'm like, where do you ever encounter a vacuum?
Right.
What does vacuum have anything to do with this conversation? Like, this
Right.
has nothing to do with this conversation. Like, why are you invoking it?
Yeah. Yeah, you're just repeating something you heard that sounds relevant, but it's
Exactly.
not.
Yeah, it's not.
Yeah. Yeah. I think, I think that this whole conversation starts to knock against consciousness and the idea that perhaps consciousness is everything and everywhere. The waveform, the field is consciousness, which makes me think that is it possible that consciousness and vibration are related and perhaps even inseparable?
In the beginning was the word.
Right.
Yeah. And so
Yeah.
so it is the movement of a vibration through the etheric medium. I mean, ether being a whole other topic. I don't know if we want to get into that. That
Sure.
gives rise to phenomenon, that gives rise to the all. So, yes, the field in which the drama of life plays out is consciousness itself.
Yes.
And this notion somehow that consciousness is an epiphenomenon of wet chemical brain activity is absurd. Like, when did the thought of a thing ever come after the thing? Never.
Right.
We're
Yeah.
told so much nonsense that doesn't even make sense, that doesn't fit together with any other model that we observe or see. So much of scientism is take this nonsense on faith.
Right.
And I
Yes.
just have a mind that
But don't call it faith.
yeah, no, it's definitely faith, especially when you don't see any kind of correlation or there isn't any explanation of the mechanism of that, or even the idea that space is a vacuum doesn't make any sense. Because
Right.
if in our model that what is our boundary of our atmosphere is simply a layer of electrons, right? The magnetosphere, the ionosphere, there's no hard boundary there. Like, how can you have a vacuum separate from something without a hard boundary? You just
Right.
can't. So that
That's
doesn't make
correct.
any sense. And then the idea that like light waves don't need a medium to travel. Well, the whole idea of a wave is that it's traveling through a medium. Like a wave can't
Yes.
travel through absolutely nothing, right? So we're just told all of these lies that are highly illogical. And then we're just kind of swallow them hook, line, and sinker because they came from an authority. And most people don't have the bandwidth to like look at it critically and question it, right?
Right.
Yeah. So, that's just that myself and my other peers who are in this field, we do look at it and go like, "Well, that doesn't make any sense. What does make more sense? What's fractally more accurate? What's more accurate? What resonates in my body?" Like, a lot of times when people have read Tuning the Human Biofield, they've come to me and said, "This makes sense." I'm like, "Yeah, that makes sense."
Yeah, it makes sense. I think I think we're in a very interesting time, and I think that researchers such as yourself are pushing forward this broader, connected, interrelated understanding of the universe of nature, of science. And that is in conflict with the standard model. But do you see science moving towards do you think it's an inevitability that science circles end up moving in this direction, or is the standard model just going to keep fighting until it can't fight anymore?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So, for my last class, I wrote this paper on magnetism, and I encountered a law that I had never encountered before. And it's called Lenz's law,
Hmm,
Lenzs, apostrophe S, Lenz's law. And basically, what this law says is moving magnetic fields will generate an electric current, and the electric current that gets generated will create its own moving magnetic field that is pushing back against what was generated. So, and when you think about this, like that actually makes sense in the way life works because otherwise things wouldn't really work. So, this works
right.
at the level of physics that I just described, electromagnetism. It works in our own piezoelectric tissues that, if something squishes in on you, your body is going to kind of squish back, right? That's that resiliency that I was talking about. It also operates at the level of psychology. If I go and threaten my teenage child that I'm going to take away some of their freedom, they're going to
Hmm,
push back, they're going to rebel. If I say to somebody, there's no such thing as viruses, they've been so programmed to believe that like viruses are the end all be all, they're
yep.
gonna have cognitive dissonance, they're gonna push back, they're gonna, right, assert their perspective. So we see this all the time in this sort of like push back in life. And that's just
Yes.
a natural law. Okay. Um, so this was really helpful for me to hear because I feel like I went back into my PhD sort of as a warrior wanting to slay.
Mm,
Like, I had
yeah.
enough of this standard model nonsense, like off with its
Right.
head. And uh,
Yeah.
and what this discovery of like push and pushback made me really realize is that the way that things move forward is really a dance.
Hmm,
It's the jitterbug, it's the tango, it's the, boop, boop, boop thing. And so really made me go from being a warrior to being a dancer. And
well said.
being willing to be like, okay, I'm gonna push on this and I'm gonna receive the pushback and whatever that is, I'm gonna sort of modify my approach and I'm gonna push again. And together, we're going to dance this whole uh understanding or this model into something that is more holistic, that is more whole systems, that is more really rational at the end of the day and logical. and
Yes,
also informed by deep study, by rigorous study, by experimentation, by, for me, familiarizing myself with the language and the systems that are already there, and how can I be additive in such a way that starts to push the needle. And I know that there are many other people doing this. I know the needle is already moving. In fact, I
yeah,
wrote another paper where I was talking about the idea of dogma in scientism, and how there's a sort of rigorous adherence to dogma of the standard model. And I,
totally.
I started to write this paper on it. They're so dogmatic. But then I realized that, there are a lot of studies coming out on how mindfulness meditation, on how music, a lot of funding right now for how music informs us. And so in that paper, I ended up talking about not, what a bunch of stuck in the mud jerks, but like, this is actually changing. This is actually opening more to this, right? So I realized
Yeah.
that I needed to speak to the transformation that was happening instead of speaking to the entrenchment that's been there. And I think
Ugh.
that that's part of it too, right? Just by how we language it and help speak it this transformation into being through that.
Yeah, I've gone through a very similar shift as well. I think that there's a lot of harm that the standard model does, and yet at the same time, we wouldn't be here if it wasn't for that standard model. It's not
Right.
that it doesn't work. It works, it just it's not sustainable in the long term
Mhm.
because its lack of interconnection and interrelationship end up to an inevitable end. And so in order to bridge that, we're going to have to move towards an interconnected model.
Yes, exactly.
And if that's the case, if humans, individual humans influence one another electromagnetically and vibrationally, what responsibility comes with that?
Well, I would say the responsibility to be coherent, right? That
Yes,
that is sort of the key word here, in that the more I get the noise out of my own signal, the more I become aligned with the true song of the cosmos, of the music of the spheres, of the breath and the whisperings of the earth, of the murmurings of my own soul, the more coherent I become. And I generate a coherent field around myself that informs the people, the space, the water, everything with that, because we are little broadcast towers, and we do absolutely influence how reality shapes itself around us. Just for an example, I just gave a talk this past weekend, an event I was at, and I asked, like, who still has road rage when they're out driving? People
totally.
kind of sheepishly raise their hands like me.
Yeah,
And I used to too. I don't at all now, because I
that's
brought my
awesome.
field to a level of coherence where, one, I'm creating my own reality tunnel that is causing me to encounter coherence, but I'm also informing the space around me with coherence, right?
Yes,
And I've resolved my own places of patience towards myself, anger towards my, because it's all about your relationship with you at the end of the day, right?
yes,
And it's easy to project it onto that idiot that pulled out in front of you and is now going 15 miles an hour under the speed limit when you're like, gotta get somewhere, right? Connect that which is already in you can like boil up in a situation like that, but it has nothing to do with that poor soul that is a little clueless that's in front of
yeah,
you, right? It has everything to do with your own pockets of tension, with your own unresolved, undigested things that are using that opportunity to express, because we need to express. We heal through expressing, not suppressing. And
right.
so
Yes,
the more coherent we become, the more calm, the more grounded, the more patient, the more compassionate, the more gratitude we experience, we'll just give a lot more grace in any kind of situation like that, right? And then that becomes a collective field. Now, can you imagine what the roads would be like if everyone was coming from that centered place where they were at peace with themselves, where they could grant patience and grace? We have a completely different world. So it's really up to each of us. And I think so many people are oriented towards this, to become the best version of themselves, to become the most coherent, capable, functional, expressed version of themselves, for their own health, if nothing else. Right.
that's right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's the nature of that hollow fractal system. You just in your road rage example and this idea that, I've worked through it to move towards this tunnel of coherence. You're describing exactly what we just talked about a little bit ago when you were talking about moving stuck energy towards the center of the torus. It's holofractal.
Yeah.
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 How do you think media and technology architecture are shaping coherence in our current world, or not shaping?
Well, unfortunately, the quote Satanists, the
Yeah.
people who have the divide and conquer agenda, the people who have the misinformation agenda. And, maybe it's not unfortunately, because I really feel like the nature of this realm is sort of like a game. It's sort of
Yeah.
like hide the truth, hide the light, give them something to do, go find the truth, go find the light, make everything a mess so that then we have something to do to like bring it back to order. And so I
Yeah.
don't necessarily see the us them dichotomy of like evil and good and they're bad and this is a prison planet. I'm like, we can hang out in disembodied bliss, but I imagine that gets boring, right? So we come
Right.
here for something to do in the same way we read books or go to plays or go to movies. It's like, let's fill the time with adventures and challenges. And so, there's this whole concept of the angel Samael in the left hand of God, the temptation, the trickster that tempts you, but then ultimately also brings you back to God. Right.
Right.
And
Yes.
so it's all God and it's all good. And it's it's challenging to navigate, right? Because there is so much darkness, so much misinformation. But then that causes us to come together in community and people are like, I found a piece of the truth. I found
Yeah.
some of the light, and we get
Yeah.
together, kind of put our puzzle pieces together. And so I think that it serves a purpose.
Yeah.
It does what is there, the dark forces, what's going on planet Earth. Um, yeah, I mean, it's up to us all individually to figure out how to navigate the game. How do you keep your health meter up? How do you keep your wealth meter up? How do you find good teammates? How do you manage to extract joy even in, a world that's obviously in decline? Um, I personally am ready to go to the party at the end of the world, like
Yeah.
I think that there's a lot of doom and gloom, and that's even part of the game to overcome. It's like,
Certainly.
can I just suck joy out of how good I made my cappuccino this morning? Can I really linger in the hugs of the people that I really love? Can I crack myself up? Can I help others to laugh? Can I now on this last album I created with the Brothers Corin, it's a real we did we did a concert of our album at this event called Confluence, and it
Yes.
was such a joy to see hundreds of people going through the experience of these songs, and people cried, and they laughed, and they danced, and they sung at the top of their lungs, and then afterwards, they were like, "That was amazing, I feel amazing," right? So how can we facilitate more experiences like that? That
Yes.
even though, yeah, life is hard and weird and sad and whatever, but we can still have a good time, and
Yeah.
support our health at the same time. So, so that's what I'm interested in is even with the darkness and the doomness, like let's still enjoy the fact that being human is so cool and so weird and so wonderful.
I love it. I think finding balance in all of it is so important, and our responsibility is coherence. Ultimately, that's what
Yeah,
it comes down to,
yeah,
and that's
absolutely.
an individual responsibility. We create collective change through our own personal transformation.
Absolutely. That experience at Confluence is a gathering of people who prioritize coherence. And so we have 1,100 people at this ranch in Bandera, Texas, and people coming with highly coherent fields because they have been stewarding that inner directive. And what happens when you put 1,100 highly coherent people together is very high voltage, very clear, very safe, very fun human experience. And really shows to me like what is the direct outcome of people not only pursuing that individually, but coming together in communities where that is prioritized. And it was amazing. Everybody was like, oh my God, this is, so soul satisfying to have an experience of my fellow humans like that.
That's awesome. Yeah, I remember seeing a post that you had made about it, and I showed it to my wife, and it's something that we want to look into going and attending next year.
Yeah.
It looks
Highly
amazing.
recommended. Yeah, definitely.
So you've got a lot of awesome projects going on. How can folks find you? How would you like them to find your music and your work?
Yeah. Well, my website, eileenmckusick.com, is a sort of a portal into all the things that I do. Sing the Body Electric, we do weekend workshops, both live and virtual. We've got this album that is People are telling me it's their favorite album. People are listening to it every day. Very healing music that's also fun and solid musically. I think people tend to think of healing music, it's like, "Oh, da, da, da." This is not that. There's some heavy metal, like head banging. There's some lullabies. There's a really diverse collection of music, again, designed to help you to express what society has told you to suppress. I have a YouTube channel. I've got a lot of stuff on that. Obviously, biofieldtuning.com, Biofield Tuning Store. I have my own line of very high quality tuning forks. My tuning forks are more expensive than everyone else's. It's because they're better, quite honestly, because I'm a terrible perfectionist and they're just made of a metal alloy that others are not. Very thoughtfully curated tuning forks there. If you want to get into sound healing, please don't buy cheap forks on Amazon. They're just not sound healing tools. And
Yeah.
you're not going to want to use a tool that isn't designed for the job. Mine really are. I've got a Substack where I kind of put my more heady stuff. I've got, as I'm writing papers for school, I'm kind of altering those up a bit to share on Substack. So that's there. Obviously, I'm on Instagram and Facebook as well. Lots of resources, lots of free resources that I've put out there. Certainly tuning the human biofield and electric body, electric health, and they're both on Audible as well. So it's a big, deep, wide, long, far ranging rabbit hole with
That's
lots
awesome.
and lots to discover. Yeah.
Yeah, you've done an amazing job of taking something that you've been called to do and finding a way in order to allow it to express itself through you. And so I really appreciate all of the resources that you provided. I've enjoyed them over the years. I hope listeners will also dig in and enjoy them because this is a part of the coherence journey that we talk about in the Morning Breath live stream that we do every day. So dig into Eileen's work because she's a pioneer and that's important stuff. I really appreciate you being here. Thank you so much.
Yeah, you bet, Jeremy. Great conversation, wonderful questions, and thanks everyone who stayed with us on this lovely journey.
So if you are interested in digging in deeper with Plowline and the Morning Breath live stream, you can join the Morning Breath live stream Monday through Friday at 5:30 a.m. Pacific time, and we spend about 15 minutes just getting into coherence and doing a little bit of breath work. You can find Plowline on all the social platforms. And if you are interested in digging in deeper into this work and partnering with us, you can go to patreon.com/Plowline Productions. Thanks for joining us today, everyone, and we look forward to seeing you soon.